The fabric was clean, but faded, a testament to long hours under the unforgiving sun and the grease-stained reality of the flight line. She wasn't a guest. She was a volunteer, one of the junior personnel roped into serving champagne and canapes. At the annual Air Force Benefactors Gala, her movements were economical, her eyes observant, taking in the preening and posturing of the base's elite. She saw women in shimmering silk gowns and men in decorated dress uniforms, their laughter echoing with a brittle, self-congratulatory ring. They were the peacocks, and she in their eyes was a sparrow, necessary but invisible. This story of a quiet woman who was profoundly misjudged will remind you that the most powerful thunder often comes from the quietest storm. And if you believe in the triumph of the underdog, make sure to subscribe and join our community of story lovers. Lara felt a gaze upon her, sharp and dissecting. It belonged to Mrs. Victoria Harrington, wife of Group Captain Harrington, a woman whose social influence on the base was as formidable as her husband's military command. Victoria stood at the center of a small, wrapped circle of other officers' wives, her crimson dress a slash of authority against the room's muted tones. Her eyes, cold and assessing, swept over Alara's practical uniform, and a slow, disdainful smile curled her lips. She gestured subtly, and Alara, seeing the summons, navigated the crowd and approached with a polite, neutral expression. "Yes, ma'am." Alara's voice was quiet, respectful. Victoria didn't look at her face. She looked at the name tag, the simple rank insignia, and the sturdy boots peeking out from beneath the coveralls. "My dear," Victoria began, her voice carrying just enough for her audience to hear, dripping with condescending sweetness, "we appreciate your help tonight. But this is a formal event, a rather exclusive one." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "That costume is hardly appropriate. It's a bit jarring, don't you think?" A few of the women in her circle tittered softly, a sound like tearing silk. The word costume was a precisely aimed dart, designed to belittle the uniform she wore with quiet pride. Lara's back straightened almost imperceptibly. Her face remained a placid mask, but inside, a familiar steel door slid shut over her. Emotions she had faced far worse than social scorn. She had faced G-force that could black out a lesser pilot, simulators that pushed the mind to its breaking point, and the very real terror of a midnight sky over hostile territory. This was nothing, yet it was everything. It was the casual cruelty of a world that judged the book by its plain, functional cover. Victoria, mistaking silence for submission, pressed her advantage. "You are making the guests uncomfortable. Gives the impression that just anyone can wander in here." She gestured towards the kitchens with a flick of her wrist, a dismissive shooing motion. "There's a staff apron in the back. Be a dear and put that on. It's far more suitable for your role here." The final insult landed. An apron. To cover the uniform of the Air Force she served, the uniform she had bled for, sweat for, and dedicated her entire life to. Alara didn't flinch. She didn't offer a defense. She looked past Victoria, her gaze distant for a moment, as if calculating trajectory and wind speed. Then her eyes returned clear and steady. She gave a single, curt nod. "Understood, ma'am." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her posture erect, her dignity a shield no condescension could penetrate. From across the room, Master Sergeant Croft, a grizzled veteran with engine oil etched into the lines of his hands, watched the entire exchange. His face, usually a canvas of gruff good humor, hardened. He had seen real courage and real sacrifice. And it looked nothing like the brittle arrogance of Victoria Harrington. It looked exactly like the quiet resilience of the young woman now walking away. He knew a secret, a brilliant, thundering secret that the entire glittering room was blind to. And he knew with absolute certainty that a reckoning was coming. Not in a ballroom, but in the vast open sky, where true merit could not be denied. The weeks that followed the gala bled into one another, each day marked by the rising sun and the scent of jet fuel. For Victoria Harrington and her circle, life continued in a predictable rhythm of coffee mornings, charity committee meetings, and casual cruelties. The incident with the girl in the costume was forgotten, a trivial footnote in their self-important lives. But for Alara Vance, these weeks were a crucible. Her life was a study in contrast to the opulent world of the officer's mess. Her quarters were not a lavish, decorated house, but a Spartan room in the bachelor officer barracks. The walls were bare, save for complex aeronautical charts and diagrams. Of a Eurofighter Typhoon's cockpit, every switch button display memorized until it was an extension of her own nervous system. While Victoria's clique discussed designer labels, Alara spent her evenings under the dim glow of a desk lamp, her mind tracing the intricate pathways of flight hydraulics and weapons systems. Her companions were not socialites, but the ghosts of aviation pioneers whose books lined her small shelf. Her perfume was not Chanel, but the lingering metallic temps of the hangar. She endured her solitude and the lingering sting of the insult, not with bitterness, but with a sharpened focus, a honing of her purpose. She poured her entire being into her work, a quiet, relentless dedication that went unseen by those who mattered most on the base's social ladder. Master Sergeant Croft would often see her, a lone figure on the tarmac in the early dawn, long before the other pilots arrived. She'd be standing by the hulking form of a Typhoon, her hand resting gently on its cold, metallic skin, as if communing with the beast. He'd bring her a steaming mug of strong black coffee. "Morning, pilot," he'd say, his voice a low rumble. He was one of the few people on the base who knew her true role, her real rank, which was far from the junior airwoman Victoria Harrington had assumed. Alara would give him a small, grateful smile. "Morning, Croft. How's she feeling today?" They would talk not of gossip or promotions, but of turbine efficiency, hydraulic pressure, and the subtle whims of the magnificent machine before them. Croft saw in her what others missed, saw the fire behind her quiet eyes, the unyielding strength in her slight frame. "Don't you mind them, lass?" he'd said to her the day after the gala, finding her in the simulator room. "The emptiest barrels make the most noise. You just keep your eyes on the horizon." Alara had simply nodded, her focus already on the simulated, heads-up display in front of her. The horizon was the only thing that mattered. The tension on the base began to build as preparations for the annual Family Day and Air Show ramped up. It was the single biggest event of the year, a day when the gates were thrown open to the public, a grand spectacle of military might and aerial prowess. The highlight, as always, was the solo tactical display by a Eurofighter Typhoon. It was a brutal, beautiful ballet of physics and firepower, a demonstration that always left the crowds breathless. On the VIP terrace overlooking the main runway, Victoria Harrington was in her element, orchestrating her exclusive viewing party. "The guest list is absolutely top tier," she announced to her friends, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on a tablet, "and we'll have the best view of the Typhoon. Those brave men, what they do is just extraordinary." The irony was a thick, cloying fog they were all oblivious to. The identity of the solo display pilot was, by tradition, a closely guarded secret until the moment of the flight. The base buzzed with speculation. Was it Wing Commander Evans, a living legend, or a hotshot new squadron leader from the exchange program? Alara heard the whispers in the mess halls and corridors. She kept her head down, her expression unreadable. The day before the show, Croft found her doing her final systems check. The air was electric with anticipation. He leaned against the Typhoon's landing gear, wiping his hands on a rag. "Time to show them what a real uniform looks like, pilot." "Vance." He said the name with emphasis, a quiet challenge to the universe. Alara looked up from her checklist, her gaze meeting his. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of something other than pure focus appeared in her eyes. It was a spark, a promise. "Yes, Sergeant," she said, her voice low and steady. "I believe it is." The day of the air show dawned bright and clear. A perfect, brilliant blue canvas for what was to come. Palpable energy coursed through the base, a mix of public excitement and military precision. Thousands of people, families with wide-eyed children and aviation enthusiasts with long-lensed cameras, filled the viewing areas. High above them, on the VIP terrace, Victoria Harrington held court. She wore a ludicrously large, feather-adorned Hat and a dress the color of money, her laughter sharp and brittle as she greeted her guests with air kisses. The clinking of champagne flutes provided a delicate counterpoint to the distant roar of jets. She felt powerful, admired, the queen of her carefully constructed world, completely unaware that her world was about to be turned upside down. The announcer's voice, amplified by speakers across the airfield, boomed with practiced enthusiasm. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. The pride of our air wing, the Eurofighter Typhoon, performing a full tactical solo display. A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. On the terrace, Victoria gestured for a refill of champagne, a smug smile on her face. "Now you'll see a real hero," she murmured to the man beside her. All eyes turned to the far end of the tarmac, where a lone Typhoon sat, shimmering in the sun like a predator at rest. A single figure, clad in a bulky, olive-green flight suit and carrying a white helmet, began the long walk toward the aircraft. The figure was lean, their stride purposeful, and utterly confident. They were anonymous, a symbol of the faceless courage of all pilots. The crowd watched in respectful silence. Victoria and her friends glanced over, momentarily distracted from their chatter. Then, just before reaching the boarding ladder, the pilot stopped and turned to face the main ground crew, offering a final salute. In a single fluid motion, the pilot reached up and removed the helmet. It was a moment of stunning revelation. Long, dark brown hair, tied back in a practical ponytail, was released from the helmet's confines. The sun caught the pilot's face and across the entire airbase. On jumbo screens and through binoculars, everyone saw her was Ilara Vance. On the ground, Master Sergeant Croft snapped to attention, a huge, proud grin splitting his weathered face as he returned her salute with a sharp, heartfelt precision. But on the VIP terrace, a different scene unfolded. Victoria Harrington's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips. Her perfectly painted smile dissolved. A small, choked gasp escaped her. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then horror as she recognized the calm, determined face on the screen. It was the face of the girl in the costume, the server, the woman she had so casually and cruelly dismissed. The chatter around her died instantly. Her friends stared, their mouths agape, the condescending smirks wiped clean from their faces, as if by a physical blow. A chilling silence fell over their little island of privilege. Down on the tarmac, Ilara was oblivious to their shock. Her world had narrowed to the cockpit in front of her. She climbed the ladder, settled into the seat, and began her pre-flight sequence. The canopy lowered with a pneumatic hiss, sealing her in her own world. The twin engines ignited, not with a roar, but with a deep, soul-shaking groan that grew into a deafening scream of raw power. The ground itself seemed to tremble. The Typhoon taxied to the runway, a sleek, gray arrow of intent. Then, with a final clearance from the tower, Ilara pushed the throttle to its limit. The jet hurtled forward, a blur of motion and a thunderclap of sound, before pulling up into a gut-wrenching vertical climb that seemed to tear a hole in the sky. The crowd gasped as one. For the next 15 minutes, Ilara didn't just fly the jet, she danced with it. She became one with the machine, a fusion of human will and technological fury. She performed aileron rolls with impossible precision, the jet spinning like a drill bit against the blue. She executed a high G turn so tight it seemed to bend the laws of physics, trailing vapor from her wingtips like ethereal ribbons. She stalled the aircraft mid-air, letting it fall like a leaf, before roaring back to life in a controlled, terrifying recovery. Each maneuver was a word, each pass a sentence, and the entire display was a speech. It spoke of discipline, it spoke of courage. And it was a thundering, undeniable reply to the woman who had told her to take off her uniform and put on an apron. The final maneuver was the most breathtaking. Lara brought the Typhoon in low and fast, roaring past the crowd at just a few hundred feet, the sound a physical blow to the chest. Then she pulled the nose up violently, engaging the afterburners. Twin blue flames erupted from the engines, and with a sound that ripped the sky apart, She ascended vertically until the jet was just a speck, a disappearing star in the daylight. A profound silence hung over the airfield for a beat, a collective holding of breath. Then, as the Typhoon began its graceful arcing descent, the applause started. It wasn't polite clapping. It was a storm, a deafening, rolling wave of pure, unadulterated awe that washed over the entire base. As the jet touched down with impossible gentleness, the eruption of cheers was even louder. People were on their feet, yelling, whistling, their faces turned upward in united admiration. On the VIP terrace, however, the atmosphere was one of shattered illusion. The champagne was flat, the laughter gone. Victoria Harrington stood as if turned to stone, her face a mask of pale, horrified humiliation. The feathers on her hat drooped. Mirroring her spirit, she could feel the stares of her guests, the sideways glances of the very people she sought to impress. They were not looking at her with envy anymore, but with a mixture of pity and contempt. The story of her cruel dismissal of the air shows hero pilot would spread through the base like wildfire, her carefully constructed social standing, built on a foundation of arrogance and borrowed status, had been obliterated in 15 minutes of aerial brilliance. Without a word, she set her untouched glass down, turned, and slipped away from her own party, a queen dethroned not by a rival, but by a ghost in a flight suit. Later that evening, as the crowds dispersed and the long shadows of sunset stretched across the tarmac, the base returned to a semblance of normality. Reception was held in the very same officers' mess hall where Alara had been shamed. This time she entered not as a server, but as the guest of honor. She wore her formal dress uniform, the dark blue fabric perfectly tailored, the silver pilot's wings gleaming proudly on her chest. The transformation in the room was absolute. Where she had once been invisible, she was now the center of gravity. Officers of higher rank approached her to shake her hand. Junior pilots looked at her with a reverence usually reserved for aces of old. The quiet hum of conversation was filled with her name, spoken in tones of respect and wonder. The silent witnesses to her humiliation were now vocal admirers of her triumph. She accepted the praise with quiet grace and humility, her replies concise and genuine. But the noise and accolades were not her world. She soon slipped away, seeking the familiar quiet of the hangars. She found Croft sitting on a crate, nursing a cup of tea, watching the ground crew put the Typhoon to bed for the night. The massive jet was quiet now, its power dormant. Croft saw her approach and handed her a second mug he had waiting. "Didn't have to say a word up there," he said, his voice filled with a deep, fatherly pride. Ilara looked out at the darkening sky, where the last vestiges of her contrails were dissolving into the twilight. She took a slow sip of the hot tea, the warmth a welcome comfort. "Sometimes, Croft," she said, her voice soft but resonant in the vast, quiet space, the best way to answer is to fly. The narrator's voice closes the story. True worth is not measured in the cost of a dress or the echo of a powerful name. It is forged in fire, proven through skill, and worn with quiet dignity. The uniform does not make the person. The person is what gives the uniform its honor. That day, Flight Lieutenant Ellara Vance didn't just fly a jet, she flew in the face of prejudice. She shattered a ceiling of glass. She taught an entire community that the most powerful people are not always the loudest, or often the ones who have the courage to let their actions speak and their spirit soar.